This goes out to anybody who doesn't see the plight of our fellow Westerners, believers, those who wanted the same dreams as I do, and that as you do, the Ukrainians. This will be an emotional, off the top, relatively deep dive into why it is in America's strategic, ice cold interests as to why we should support Ukraine, as well as the emotional, moral, and rational reasons as to why there should be no debate around this topic at all. So, let me just start with where the drama is centered around, right? Let's say we permit Putin to go on a rampage to protect the Russian speakers of the world. All right, where do we draw the line? Let's look at the UK, India, New Zealand, the United States, Australia, Canada. I mean, there's so many different countries that would get eradicated if we even permit that idea for a second. For a second. So, with that off the jump, everybody in America speaks English. Everybody in Australia speaks English. Everybody in Canada speaks English. Everybody in New Zealand speaks English. Like, there's so many nations. All right, there's relatively a lot of nations that speak English as their primary language. That's such a slippery slope. If I speak English, doesn't mean I give a fuck what Canadians do. If I speak English, doesn't mean I can give a fuck what Canadians do. So if the vast majority of a country speaks the same language, right? But they're different people? What does that language even signify? What does that mean? We spoke the same language as the United Kingdom when we fought for our independence. And if somebody were to tell any of the founding fathers, like, I mean, the UK, they're just trying to protect the English speakers, you should just submit. How would that have flown? How would that have flown? People say, Ukraine isn't a superpower. Why would we risk nuclear war over the Donbass? Let me tell you, there's no such thing as risking nuclear war. If there was, it would have already happened decades ago. No politician threatens nuclear war to scare the politicians. They do it to scare you and me and our friends and our family. Every politician takes it into their calculations that they know the nukes are off the table. American and Western politicians, they don't fear death nearly to the same degree as Eastern or autocratic politicians. Because the number one thing that all dictators fear the most, the reason why they act so out of pocket, is because the one thing they're afraid of is dying. And when you look, every single state propagandist or Russian politician, every single one of their children live in the West. They live in the UK, the United States, they live in France. But they live here. They want to be here. They crave to be us. So when all of our enemies' children live in our countries and they crave to be us, and we're afraid of how we might offend their parents when their parents gratefully offload them to the more prosperous and beneficial life that we can provide. If you think that these dictators are going to nuke their kids when they damn well sure know that they're going to die too, I got a bridge to sell you in Quebec. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know anything about Quebec. It probably touches the ocean. But, like, there's nothing more gullible, naive, and just foolish, absolutely foolish, to not look at the immediate path of history in that front. We've had nukes, only used them once. We used them once, and we learned. If they were to be used, the Korean War, Stalin, Truman were still alive. The Cold War was at its peak. Relatively, that's debatable. But in my mind, when Stalin was alive, Cold War was at its peak because not a single Eastern autocrat could even come close to the effectiveness and the aptitude of Stalin, and I don't like him. I feel similar about Henry Kissinger, but they're not the same, of course. But even if what you do and what you intended on doing is bad, but you executed it with pure proficiency to the end, it's a different type of bad. Right? Like, if somebody's really bad at something, but they can give you a rational justification as to why it's okay, it's like, still bad, but kudos to, like, making it seem like it's not, but it is. So, if nukes were going to be used, they would have been used already. We were attacked during 9/11, we didn't use nukes. Alright? India and Pakistan have been in several wars, not used nukes. Right? Like, if nukes were to determine the course of history and they were to determine superpowers, then we would be respecting North Korea and Pakistan the same degree that we respect France, China, or any other nuclear power. We don't. We don't. If North Korea was to invade South Korea in order to protect the Korean-speaking people, let's let them do it, right? They have much more in common because they speak Korean, right? Kim Jong-un should know what's best because he speaks Korean. But wait, North and South Korea are pretty different. So would it be fair if we let a country with innumerable amount of differences rule another, even though they might speak the same language, right? It's okay. It's pretty much the same country. So that's number one. Number two, the proxy war bullshit. Every war is technically a proxy war. Any war at all, unless it's between you and your brother, you and your sister, you and your neighbor, or whatever, is a proxy war. Now, if that proxy war is 99% your contribution, 1% somebody else's contribution, 99% your enemy's contribution, 1% somebody else's contribution, that's a proxy war. And if you were to look through history, everybody would have assumed when you go back to the 1700s that the US, it's not a real country. It's just a proxy front for France and the UK. You know, nobody was looking at the US's interests as if it was its own country. It was just a proxy war. Look at the United States now. That's what I hope for Ukraine. That's what I dream for Ukraine. It breaks my heart because the Ukrainians have been systematically erased from history from all fronts. Every single one. When they were the sole, not the sole superpower, right? But when it was the Kievan Rus, the Duchy of Muscovy, all these places, why does Kiev come before Rus? If we're talking about ancient historic territories, Russia wouldn't exist. That would all be Ukraine, right? So this subjective stuff, part of what this video is tackling, there's so much noise, so much distraction that might sound reasonable when you don't actually listen, and it's convenient. It's much more convenient. Like, I don't want to fight World War III. You know, they all look the same. They all speak the same. Shit, why not, right? So that's another part. But something that I want to really make it clear, there's a clear line between annoyed to enabling to permitting to accepting. We're at the acceptance part, unfortunately. We have accepted the fact that these nations are going to take other people's territories. They're going to disrupt every single thing that's made us develop the last 80 years. And we're going to do nothing. We're not going to do nothing because we couldn't do something. We're going to do nothing because we chose not to do anything. If you saw an innocent person getting mugged, assaulted in the streets, and you had all the power to do something, and you just outright ignored it, it's not that you chose indifference. It's not that you knew it happened and walked away. It's like you saw it, knew what it was, and didn't care that it happened. And that's a certain type of sickness that I'm not quite ready to accept that we become. Now, the most heartbreaking part is the only reason why Ukraine is involved in this is because of our indecisions. One, we didn't let them in NATO into 2004. Two, going back to my first video, we should have never let Stalin go as far as he did. Everything's clear with hindsight, I get it. Ukraine, Georgia, Kaliningrad, Moldova, Taiwan, the CCP, the Chinese Civil War. Every single one of the issues that we're dealing with right now has a direct through line to the past. Now, given that is every historical situation, without question, right? But we decided to recognize the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China, and we continued to only recognize one China. That's why Taiwan isn't independently recognized as its own nation. That's why China feels it's got a right to claim Taiwan, right? That was something we decided not to act upon. Something we decided not to act upon was the borders of Eastern Europe. And look at what the biggest war since World War II, borders of Eastern Europe. The Malacca Strait, the Strait of Hormuz. There's so many different flashpoints on this planet right now. And all I gotta say is if you think indecision is an option, just can't wait till that option chooses for you.